Hi folks, so I wanted to answer that question that I posted yesterday about injury versus dysfunction. So if you're wondering why I'm asking this, it's because quite often people will say, oh, I've got an injury, when actually they don't have an injury, they've got a dysfunction, and there is a difference, and I'll tell you why it's important afterwards. So if you've got an injury, it usually means that your soft tissue has been subjected to some kind of force that it's incapable of absorbing. So for example, if you're running along and then you trip and you fall and you break something, then obviously you've got an injury. Or if you just fall and you twist your ankle, so you've sprained your ankle, so you have created an unexpected, unusual force for your ankle, so you may have sprained your ligaments, so it's overstretched that tissue basically, and it's created some damage. So your tissue will then be either broken, which then needs to heal, or it might have been overstretched, so again it's damaged and it needs to heal. So you can get a strain, which is a pull, or you could get a break where it has completely broken, or a sprain where it has torn part way. So there's different ways of incurring your injury, but basically there's been some sort of force that's created an effect on your body that it's not been able to absorb. So it's some sort of trauma. Dysfunction, on the other hand, usually arises from either chronic use or from a chronic injury or overuse. So it might be that an injury that hasn't recovered properly, that's become a dysfunction, or it's as a result of something that you're doing regularly that's creating your dysfunction. So tissue is absent of disease, so you've got no disease and it's free of inflammation. Now inflammation is a bit of a funny one because inflammation is there to help it heal, and usually it's present when you've had an injury. However, if you've got chronic pain, you might find you're still getting inflammation because your tissue thinks it still needs to repair and it's still inflamed. But when it's dysfunctional, we're talking about tissue that has no disease and it's not had some recent trauma. So usually it's, let's say you've got some pain in your hip area when you're walking. That's not an injury, that will be tissue dysfunction in some way. So basically your muscles are stressing your joint and it's causing it to hurt when you move. So it might be changing your movement pattern, or it's causing an imbalance in your joint. So basically that's why you're feeling it in your joint. So it's not injured as such, it's just you're getting that pulling and that strain feeling because it's not moving quite right. It's just not moving properly the way it's supposed to move. So why is it important to know the difference between injury and dysfunction? Well, a lot of it is to do with the time it takes your tissue to repair when it's injured. So if you've had an injury, so for example, if you've sprained your ankle when you've been walking or falling down the stairs or whatever, your tissue, if it's damaged, will need to repair, and there is a repair phase that your body goes through in it. There are different stages of repair. So let's say you cut yourself, so this is something that you can visualize. You cut yourself and there's blood coming through, so you've sliced your arm open, blood is seeping out of it, so you've got a hole in your arm now. For that to heal, it needs to scab over. Once it's scabbed over, obviously it takes a while depending on how deep it is before that scab removes and then your skin is repaired. The same thing occurs inside. So when you damage your soft tissue, be it your muscles, your tendons or your ligaments, there's some damage that's occurred, it needs to recover and repair. So the same thing has to happen like with your arm, only you can't see it, but there is that repair process taking place and scar tissue forms each time. So when you're repairing an injury, you need to go through phases where you overstretch so that it can become more elastic. So if you think of it in terms of the way it moves like this, if scar tissue forms on it, it doesn't allow it to stretch anymore. So if you then overstretch when you haven't gone through the repair phase properly, you go and overstretch it again, it will break. So you want to ensure that your tissue has enough elasticity in it during that repair phase so that it can withstand the strains of normal life when you use your body the way it was designed to be used again. So for example, if it was, so your ankle, if you've had an ankle sprain in the past, you might find that you're more susceptible to ankle sprains again. So you might have had several on that same leg because you've either not built back the strength back into the tissue around that your ankle joint, and also when you've been recovering, you haven't created enough strain and stress within those tissues so that it becomes a strong tissue again. So right now you might have formed that tissue where it doesn't stretch anymore. So when you do go over it, it will just break. So you end up with that same injury, and that's why people end up with recurring injuries in the same area, because the tissue hasn't repaired properly and it's no longer robust. Whereas if you've got a tissue dysfunction, you're in a much better place. You don't have to go through that recovery process because nothing is really damaged. It's just this in the wrong place, or it's just imbalanced, so the whole area is imbalanced. So if you can create that balance again, it will prevent you from having an injury. So for example, let's talk about a shoulder. So if you're feeling like you've got a lot of pulling in your shoulder when you lift your arm, let's say you get your arm here and you're feeling loads of pulling in the front here, you're not injured because you've not damaged this area, not that I know of, let's say, and it's just pulling here, so your shoulders can't go any higher because it's pulled there. So this is your dysfunction. So you're going to feel like it's pulling really here. It might feel like it's overstretched and strained in that area, and it might well be because this is pulling you tight here. So what we want to do is just create that balance in that joint by stretching out your pecs and strengthening the back of your shoulder and releasing anything that shouldn't be tight, that's tight, so that you've got that balance there and that you can return to that full range of motion. So you've not had to go through a repair phase. Whereas if you'd left it, so let's say your arm comes up this high, it's really tight, and then one day you went like this, that's when your injury might occur, because you're restricted in your movement here and then you forced it up. So you might get tearing at the back here, or you might get tearing at the front. That will vary from one person to another depending on how you've moved it, but your injury has now occurred and you've actually got torn tissue, so that tissue then needs to recover and it needs to repair itself. So as it's recovering, you've got that scar tissue. So let's say you've torn it and now you can only get it this high, and as it's repairing, you'd need to like stretch it and then allow it to heal, but keep working it so that the elastic would come back. You're better off working with a physio on things like this where you actually have damaged tissue, whereas if it's just a dysfunction, anyone can work with you in terms of improving the way your joints and how your body moves. So I prefer to work with people who have dysfunction just because it's more about the improving the balance around the joint. Whereas if it's a fresh injury, that's what physios are there for. They're there to help you go through that repair phase and ensure that your tissue is getting the right testing that it needs at each stage so that it repairs properly, so that it can be effective again. So if you are carrying a dysfunction at the moment and you're umming and ahhing about what you can do about it, it's just aching and it's causing you pain, this is a time when you need to really think about actually what can you do now, right now, to start improving the sensations and the movements so that you don't turn it into an injury. It's all about preventing that injury. As soon as you get an injury, firstly, you're not going to be able to move that joint for ages, especially if you've got a tear or a break. And the repair process is a long journey and it takes ages. So you've got to wait for the tissue to repair, you've got to go through all the rehab, and you're going to have to see specialists along the way. Whereas if it's a dysfunction, catch it early, start working on it, start fixing it. It'll still be a long journey, but it'll be a different journey and you'll still have your movement. Whereas with your tear, you might not even be able to lift your arm up anymore and you'll just be in a lot more pain. It's a lot more discomfort. So it's always better to prevent that injury from occurring and deal with your dysfunctions as soon as you can. And try not to pick up any dysfunctions by keeping your body balanced through your maintenance. So that's the difference. If you've got any questions about this, then feel free to ask them and I'll get back to you. So thank you for watching. Okay, bye.